Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 28th chapter, text number 22. Yachaucha nisrita sarit pravarodakena tirthena murdnyadikritena shiva shivo bhut dhyatur manashamala shaila nisrishta vajram Jayeshchiram Bhagavatas Charanarvindam. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. The blessed Lord Shiva becomes all the more blessed by bearing on his head the holy waters of the Ganges, which has its source in the water that washed the Lord's lotus feet. The Lord's feet act like thunderbolts hurled to shatter the mountain of sin stored in the mind of the meditating devotee. One should therefore meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, the position of Lord Shiva is specifically mentioned. The impersonalist suggests that the absolute truth has no form and that one can therefore equally imagine the form of Vishnu or Lord Shiva or the goddess Durga or their son Ganesha. But actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Master of everyone. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adilila 5:142 it is said, Ekale Ishvara Krishna Arasabhubhritya. The Supreme Lord is Krishna and everyone else including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, not to mention other demigods, is a servant of Krishna. The same principle is described here. Lord Shiva is important because he is holding on his head the holy Ganges water which has its origin in the foot wash of Lord Vishnu. In the Hari Bhakti Vyasa by Sanatana Goswami, it is said that anyone who puts the Supreme Lord and the demigods including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma on the same level at once becomes a Pashandi or atheist. We should never consider that the Supreme Lord Vishnu and the demigods are on an equal footing. Another insignificant point of this verse is that the mind of the conditioned soul, on account of its association with the material energy from time immemorial, contains heaps of dirt in the form of desires to lord it over material nature. This dirt is like a mountain, but a mountain can be shattered when hit by a thunderbolt. Meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord acts like a thunderbolt on the mountain of dirt in the mind of the yogi. If a yogi wants to shatter the mountain of dirt in his mind, he should concentrate on the lotus feet of the Lord and not imagine something void or impersonal. Because the dirt has accumulated like a solid mountain, one must meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for quite a long time. For one who is accustomed to thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord constantly, however, it is a different matter. The devotees are so fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord that they do not think of anything else. Those who practice the yoga system must meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time after following the regulative principles and thereby controlling the senses. It is specifically mentioned here, Bhagavatas Charanarvindam. One has to think of the lotus feet of the Lord. The Mayavadis imagine that one can think of the lotus feet of Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma or the goddess Durga to achieve liberation, but this is not so. Bhagavataha is specifically mentioned. Bhagavataha means of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, and no one else. Another significant phrase in this verse is Shiva Shivo Bhut. By his constitutional position, Lord Shiva is always great and auspicious, but since he has accepted on his head the Ganges water, which emanated from the lotus feet of the Lord, he has become even more auspicious and important. The stress is on the lotus feet of the Lord. A relationship with the lotus feet of the Lord can even enhance the importance of Lord Shiva, what to speak of other ordinary living entities. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport.
We are reading in this part of the Bhagavatam Lord Kapila's instructions on dhyana or meditation. He has been describing how the meditator should worship, should meditate on the different parts of the transcendental body of Vishnu And he has begun in the last verse and in today's verse that one should begin meditation on the lotus feet of the Lord. Dhyayet chiram bhagavatas charanara vindam. Chiram means for a long time. Dhyayet chiram bhagavatas charanara vindam. And in this verse, in today's verse, Kapila Deva has described two important effects of such worship. In the previous verse also he mentioned an important effect. Jyotsna birahata mahad hrudayandhakaram, hrudaya andhakaram ahata. It can destroy the darkness in the heart of a living entity. And in today's verse, Lord Kapila is saying, Yat shaucha nisruta sarit pravarodakena. Sarit means river. Sarit pravara. The word vara means varangas chandanangadi, means foremost or the supreme. So pravara means further intensification. Very, very special sarit. Very, very special river in the world is Ganga. So Ganga is referred to as Sarit Pravara Udakena, the waters from. Yet shaucha nisruta Sarit Pravarodakena Tirthena Murdhani Adhikrutena. Murdhani on his head, Adhikrutena, he bears Tirthena, the holy waters, from Sarit Pravara Udakena, which is holy, Tirthena, and that water which has washed the lotus feet. Yat refers to the Lord's lotus feet, which is being described. Yat shaucha nisruta, the water which has washed the lotus feet of the Lord, which is Ganga, and the holy water, that murdhani adhikrutena, he carries it on his head. Who does that? Shiva, Lord Shiva. Who does that? And by doing that, what happens to him? Shiva abhut. The word Shiva means auspicious. So Shiva Shivo abhut means Shiva becomes even more auspicious by carrying the water on his head. Dhyatuhu, and that meditator who is doing the dhyana, Dhyatur manashamala shaila nisrishta vajram. Manashamala, shamala means dirt, sins, impurities which are in the mind. And how much impurities? A little bit of it, a few grams of impurity? No, shaila, shamala shaila, a mountain of impurity in the heart. Manashamala shaila nisrishta vajram, a thunderbolt hurled at such a shaila, mountain of contamination in the heart of a dhyatuhu. And hence dhyayet, one should meditate chiram, for a long time, bhagavatas charanara vindam. The blessed Lord Shiva becomes all the more blessed. Shivaha, Shivo abhut, becomes. By bearing on his head, murdhni adhikrutena, the holy waters, tirthena, of the Ganges, Sarit Pravara Udakena, which has its source in the water that washed the Lord's lotus feet. Tat shaucha nisrita, water that washed and it is flowing out. The Lord's feet act like thunderbolts, vajram, hurled, nisrushta, to shatter the mountain of sin. Shamala shaila, stored in the mind of the meditating devotee, dhyatuhu manaha. One should therefore meditate, dhyayet, on the lotus feet of the Lord, Bhagavatas Charanara Vindam, for a long time, Chiram. So, these are two beautiful verses, last verse and this verse, describing about how a yogi should meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord, which is relevant to us also as bhakti yogis. And and what are the effects of such meditation? Lord Kapila is describing. Shiva Abhut. Lord Shiva is, Prabhupada mentioned in the purport, that he is always very important, very great, and very auspicious. This is Lord Shiva's position. And even such Lord Shiva, who is so great, who is so auspicious, who brings auspiciousness, who spreads auspiciousness, actually that's the position of Lord Shiva. In the Bhagavatam, the true position of Shiva is explained. And Shiva may be living in a crematorium. He may be dressed in the simplest of clothes and strewn with ashes from the crematorium. And he is adorned with not some great jewelry and all such things, with snakes and such things. But at heart, Lord Shiva is a very, very great devotee of the Lord. That's why when he saw that there is water which has washed the lotus feet of the Lord, he carries that on his head. And by that, even he becomes even more auspicious. So that's an interesting expression here. Shiva Shivo Abhu. Even Shiva becomes Shiva. Even Lord Shiva becomes auspicious by carrying the water from that has washed the lotus feet of the Lord. Like say in our country, we all know Ambanis are very rich people. Suppose we get an opportunity to go and meet the Ambanis, very rich people, right? And so we go to them, and the very rich people, crores and crores, thousands of crores, lakhs of crores turnover in their business, so huge. And we go to them and tell, I've got one idea, one great business idea. And by that business, you can make 100 rupees profit every month. You think he'll be impressed? He'll laugh at us. What are you saying? But if we go to him and tell, sir, a big man you are, I've got one great idea, great business idea. You can make 1,000 crore profit every month. 12,000 crores in a year. Oh, is that so? He'll be interested in, right? Substantial profit. So, he is already a rich man. Something that he is interested in means something that should make him richer. Already rich man, he has to become richer. That will interest him. Not some 100 rupees per month. So in the same way, Shiva is already very auspicious, very great. Something that will interest him, something that will make him even more auspicious. How great that should be. And that is the Lord's lotus feet. Yat shausha nisruta sarit pravarodakena tirthena murdhena adhikrithena Shiva Shivo Abhu. Lord's lotus feet are so great, so auspicious, so special, that even Shiva, who is so great, can become greater. That's the idea. So Shiva Shivo Abhut. Even Shiva can become more auspicious by the water from the lotus feet of the Lord. And the second effect is Manashamala Shaila Nisrushta Vajram. Dhyatur, the meditator's mind, it is like the Vajra. It's like a mountain of dirt. Prabhupada has nicely explained here. Another significant point of this verse is that the mind of the conditioned soul, this is the mind of the conditioned soul, on account of its association with material energy from time immemorial, contains heaps of dirt in the form of desires to lord it over material nature. And meditation on the lotus feet of the Lord is like a Vajra hurled at the heart of a devotee, yogi, whose mind has a mountain of dirt. And what is that dirt? Desire to lord it over material nature. It's an important metaphor used here by Kapila. Manashamala Shaila. We should not underestimate. This is actually the position of the conditioned soul. The quantum of dirt in the heart, or the depth and intensity of the desire of the conditioned soul to lord over material nature, is very, very big. It's not just some small one bag of dirt. No, it's a mountain. It's a mountain of dirt. And to get free of that, because for bhakti to manifest, esham tvanta gatena, if one has to develop bhakti, come to the level of drudhavratena bhajatam, to come to the level of, with great strong desire to worship the Lord, to do Krishna bhajana, is not a small thing. Esham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam. Papam antagatam. One has to end, one has to be freed from all sinful activities, sinful reactions and contaminations that impel the living entity to act in a sinful way. One has to, antagatam, should have ended. So that is why Rupa Goswami says, one of the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service is sudhurlabham. This is rarely achieved. This is the translation by Srila Prabhupada. Sudhurlabha means rarely achieved. So what we are trying to achieve in Krishna consciousness, what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wants to give us, is a very, very special thing. On the other hand, we are conditioned souls born in Kali Yuga with a mountain of dirt in the heart, and that mountain of dirt should be shattered to zero. Esham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam dhrudavrataha mam bhajante. This Prabhupada explains, this verse in the Bhagavad Gita describes the qualification for pure devotional service. This is the qualification. So very big. So we should not underestimate. We should not think that, oh, I'm 5 years, 10 years, I'm such a senior devotee. No, this takes to become purified. It's not a small thing. Sudhurlabha. to achieve all of these, the state of consciousness that Prabhupada is offering, Bhagavatam verses are presenting. It's a very, very special achievement, which is rarely achieved. So pure devotional service is very, very special. One of the characteristics in the description of the 6 Goswamis, this verse is there. Shri Gauranga Gunanu Varnana Vidhau Shraddha Samruddhyanvithau. These are the great devotees who came with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They were all very confidential associates of the Lord. And they manifested in their activities in this world as a gold standard for devotional service. The 6 Goswamis especially. They set the standard. What is it to be a devotee of the Lord? Shri Gauranga Gunanu Varnana Vidhau. Gauranga Gunanu Varnana Vidhau. Gauranga Guna Anuvarnana Vidhau. In the process, Vidhau, Vidhana, in the process of describing Anuvarnana of the qualities of Gauranga, Vidhau, Shraddha Samruddhyanvithau. Anvithau means, Anvitaha means to be possessed of, to be endowed with. And what were they possessed of? Shraddha Samruddhi Anvithau. Samruddhi Shraddha means an abundance of Shraddha they were endowed with to glorify, to describe the wonderful qualities of Gauranga. Because that Shraddha, Chaitanya Charitamrita describes, Shraddha is the measure of the position of a devotee. Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama, this is on the basis of Shraddha Anusare. It is on the basis of one's Shraddha. And see, we hear about the 6 Goswamis, Shraddha Samruddhyanvithau. So to come to these stages of devotion is not a small thing. And the meditation on the lotus feet of the Lord helps us to shatter this mountain of impurities. There's another place in the Bhagavatam, in the very first canto. We know how Bhagavatam, Vyasa was instructed by Narada Muni. There are 2 important chapters in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, full of Narada's instructions. 5th and the 6th chapter. In the 5th chapter, almost concluding, there are 40 verses. Towards the end of actually Narada Muni more or less concluded, but in the 6th chapter, Vyasa is not satisfied. He again triggers another discussion. My dear spiritual master, after you were initiated by those great sages from whom you heard this Krishna Katha, what did you do? And Prabhupada comments that that's the nature of a disciple. He wants to know more and more about his spiritual master and his activities. That eagerness should be there. A disciple should have that appetite, that eagerness, that hunger, that I must know more and more about my spiritual master and his glorious activities. That's an indication of spiritual merit. So, in the previous chapter, he is almost concluding, Narada. He says, with this verse, Om Namo Bhagavate Tubhyam Vasudevaya Dhimahi Pradyumna Aniruddhaya Namas Sankarshanaya Cha. And then he says, let us all chant, this is Prabhupada's translation, very nice. Let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva. along with his plenary expansions of Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Sankarshana. So he more or less concludes by saying this, and then he says in the next verse, this is very important, these 3-4 verses are very important to read them in a sequence. Iti murtya bhidhanena mantra murtim amurtikam yajate yagna purusham sasamyak darshana puman. Samyak darshana. Samyak means complete or perfect. Darshana. One can have complete or perfect darshana or complete realization, perfect realization. See, this is what Narada Muni is offering to Vedavyasa. And Vedavyasa takes these instructions carefully and writes the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is what the Bhagavatam is offering us. How we can have complete and perfect realization of the absolute truth. So these are the words. We have to take these words and these expressions very seriously. Sasamyak darshana puman yajate yagna purusham sasamyak darshana puman. And such a person will be able to worship the Lord. Yajate yagna purusham. Iti, Narada Muni is saying, iti meaning in this way. Because he mentioned the verse, the mantra in the previous verse. And so he's saying, by chanting these mantras in this way, Murtya bhidhanena mantra murtim amurtikam yajate yagna purusham. In this way one worships the Supreme Lord Yagna Purusha and sa samyak darshana puman. And he can attain complete realization of the Lord. And how? How does that work? Iti murtya bhidhanena. Abhidhana means an expression, a vocal expression. Murti abhidhanena means a sound representation. Murti means a representation. Murti abhidhanena means in this way, referring to the chanting of the mantra, he's saying in this way, by the sound representation of the Lord, by the chanting of the Lord's holy names. Iti murtya bhidhanena mantra murthim. Mantra murthim, again, sound representation. Mantra murthim. Mantra means sound, the holy hymns, the chanting of the mantras. Mantra murthim, the form representation of the Lord. Amurtikam, but the Lord is not having a material form. He does not have a material form. That Supreme Lord who has no material form, by chanting His holy name, one can worship the Supreme Lord and attain complete realization, perfect realization of the Lord. I'll read the translation. Thus, he is the actual seer who worships in the form of transcendental sound representation the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, who has no material form. He is Amurtikam. He has no material form. We as conditioned souls only can see material things because we have a material senses. We have a material body and a material senses. Eyes, ears and all of this. So we can only see material things. So a special arrangement has been made that Amurtikam, when he is in the sound representation, if we can chant, we can have Samyak Darshanaha. Having said this, in the next verse, Imam Swanigamam Brahman Avetya Mad Anushtitam Adhan me Gnanam Aishwaryam Swasmin Bhavam Cha Keshavaha. These are all very significant. This is Narada describing his own experience, what happened to him. So he's saying, Imam Swanigamam Brahman, O Brahmana, O Vyasa Deva, Avetya Mad Anushtitham. Avetya, the Lord saw me, Mad Anushtitham. He saw me carrying out the spiritual process activities perfectly, properly, very sincerely. Mad Anushtitham. He saw me properly situated. Anushtitham means properly situated. Mad Anushtitham. He saw me properly situated. And so what did he do? Adan. He gave. And what did he give? Adan me gnanam. He gave me, blessed me, he bestowed on me transcendental knowledge, gnanam. Aishwaryam. He gave me Aishwaryam, opulence. And Acharya's comment, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura, they comment, this here Aishwarya refers to the opulence of the mystic powers. Narada was endowed with those Ashtasiddhis, mystic powers. Not just that, Swasmin bhavam cha Keshavaha. Bhavam swasmin. His own bhavam refers to love, bhava bhakti. So he blessed me with knowledge, mystic opulence, and love for him. And that love for him, swanigamam, is the confidence, is that which is described in the confidential parts of the Vedic literatures. I'll read the translation by Srila Prabhupada. O Brahmana, thus by the Supreme Lord Krishna, I was endowed first with transcendental knowledge of the Lord as inculcated in the confidential parts of the Vedas, then with the spiritual opulences, Aishwaryam, and then with his intimate loving service. Bhavam cha Keshava. And he bestowed on me that intimate swasmin bhavam cha Keshava. So, like this, Narada was bestowed with this love. And in the purport, Prabhupada mentions, communion with the Lord by transmission of the transcendental sound is not different from the whole spirit, Lord Sri Krishna. It is a completely perfect method for approaching the Lord. The chanting of the holy name, it is the completely perfect method for approaching the Lord. By such pure contact with the Lord, without offense of material conceptions, the devotee can rise above the material plane to understand the inner meaning of the Vedic literatures, including the Lord's existence in the transcendental realm. I just skipped 1-2 words. I'll come back to that. I'll read again. It is a completely perfect method for approaching the Lord. The chanting of the holy names. Iti murtya bidhanena is referring to that. So, when we chant the holy name of the Lord, what happens? By such pure contact with the Lord, we can attain contact with the Lord. And it is pure contact with the Lord, without offense of material conceptions. And within brackets, Prabhupada has mentioned numbering 10, referring to the 10 offenses that we chant in the morning Mangalarati. So, without offense of material conceptions, these 10 offenses actually are, if we carefully study them, they are all connected to the material conception of the position of the Lord and the holy name of the Lord. Lord's holy name is not material. It is transcendental, it is spiritual. And so, when we are free from such offenses, we can chant the Lord's holy name, then we can come to that pure contact with the Lord. then the devotee can rise above the material plane to understand the inner meaning of the Vedic literatures, including the Lord's existence in the transcendental realm. How the Lord exists in the transcendental realm, what is his true position, we can have pure contact with the Lord. So these are all very, very special benedictions, and which then such contact with the Lord's holy name and such contact with the Lord will awaken the pure love that every living entity has in his heart. Krishna Prema Nitya Siddha Sadhya Kabunai. So these are some of the wonderful benefits of chanting the holy name, and that is the path of Krishna consciousness which we are practicing. We'll stop here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.